I spent 6 months hating him. I spent 182 days planning my escape. I was counting the guards at the gate. I was memorizing the shift changes. I was looking for a weakness in the armor of the man they called the silencer. I thought I was his prisoner. I thought I was just collateral damage. A piece of property exchanged to settle a gambling debt that wasn't even mine. I believed he was the monster under my bed, the villain in my story. I was wrong. I didn't know the truth. Not until the night the sky tore open above us. The rain was mixing with the blood pooling on the asphalt. I didn't know that while I was sleeping in his house. While I was hating him, he was the only thing standing between me and a fate worse than death. I watched him fall. I saw the bullet tear through the expensive charcoal suit he always wore like a shield. And as he lay there in the mud, as he gasped for air, he looked at me with those cold, slate-gray eyes that I had learned to fear. He didn't ask for help. He didn't beg for mercy. He just whispered one thing. I told you to stay in the garden, but to understand why he took the bullet, you have to go back. You have to go back to the day the bell above my shop door chimed. And my father sold me for the price of a luxury car. I didn't know then that this was the last day I would ever be free. Part 1, The Harvest. The bell above the door of the Gilded Petal jingled. It was a cheerful, brassy sound that mocked the knot of anxiety permanently tightening in my stomach. Mrs. Abernathy was sniffing at the bucket of peonies, complaining about the price. $12 for 3 stems was robbery, she said. She could get them for half that at the supermarket. I forced a smile. I wiped my soil-stained hands on my apron. I kept my voice steady. Practiced. It was the customer service voice. The voice that didn't reveal that I had skipped lunch just to pay the water bill. I told her the supermarket flowers were flown in from Ecuador. These were grown here, in the greenhouse out back. They'd last twice as long. She picked up a stem and inspected it for flaws like she was buying a diamond. She commented that the shop looked tired, that the sign out front was peeling. I know. I wanted to scream it. I know the sign is peeling. I know the floorboards are warping. I know the hydrangeas are dying because I can't afford the nitrogen fertilizer they need. I lied smoothly about planning renovations soon, just waiting for the right season. Mrs. Abernathy finally decided on 3 stems. She handed over a $20 bill like it was a personal favor. I rang it up on the ancient register. The drawer popped open with a sluggish groan. I counted the change carefully. Every cent mattered. She asked me to tell my father hello as she breezed out. She hadn't seen him in weeks and wondered if he was ill. My hands froze over the register. I told her he was busy, handling suppliers. She left with a reminder that he owed her for a loaf of sourdough. I let the smile drop instantly. It fell off my face like a heavy mask. I leaned against the counter. I exhaled a breath I felt like I'd been holding since morning. Handling suppliers. That was the lie I told the neighbors. The lie I told the bank. The lie I sometimes tried to tell myself. The truth was, Arthur wasn't handling suppliers. He was handling a deck of cards, or a roulette wheel, or whatever new vice he had found to drown the grief of losing Mom 5 years ago. I looked down at the register. I counted the take for the day. $42 from the morning rush. $12 for Mrs. Abernathy. $54. I opened the drawer under the counter. I pulled out the stack of envelopes I had been avoiding. The electricity bill, final notice. The water bill, past due. The property tax assessment, ominous and red. $54 wouldn't even keep the lights on for another week. I whispered to the empty shop to think. I told myself I could fix this. I always fixed this. I grabbed a spray bottle. I moved to the window display. The hydrangeas were the worst off. Their blue petals were browning at the edges. They were drooping with thirst and malnutrition. I misted them gently. I whispered to them like they were pets. It was a Tuesday. Tuesdays were usually quiet. But the silence today, it felt different. It felt heavy, charged, like the air before a thunderstorm, when the pressure drops and the birds stop singing. I was trimming a dead leaf when the door crashed open. It didn't jingle. It slammed against the plaster wall so hard the glass pane cracked. I spun around. The shears were raised instinctively. My father stumbled into the shop. He looked like a man who had been hunted for sport. His gray hair was wild. It was sticking up in tufts. His shirt, one I had ironed for him 2 days ago, was stained with sweat and dirt. He was panting, harsh, wheezing gasps that rattled in his chest. He didn't look at me. He ran for the back room. He scrambled over the counter. He knocked over a display of vases. He screamed at me to lock the door. His voice was high and thin. I dropped the shears and ran to him. He was trying to wedge himself between the industrial cooler and the wall. I begged him to stop, to tell me what was happening, to tell me if he was hurt. He grabbed my wrist. His hands were ice cold. He was shaking so violently, he vibrated. He told me he was here, that he had found him. I demanded to know who. Was it the bank? The landlord? He looked at me with wide, bloodshot eyes and whispered the name. The silencer, my blood froze. The name hung in the air. It sucked the oxygen out of the room. I knew the name. Everyone in the city knew the name. It was a name used to frighten children and silence witnesses. Stefano DeLuca, the head of the DeLuca crime family. The man who owned the docks, the unions, and half the police force. I whispered that he said he stopped. The betrayal hit me harder than the fear. I stepped back. I pulled my hands away from him. I reminded him he swore on Mom's grave that he was done. He sobbed. He curled into a ball. He claimed the tips were good. He thought he could win it back. He thought he could pay off the mortgage. I asked how much. My voice was dead. He whimpered. He buried his face in his hands. I asked again. 200, he mumbled. $200. A spark of hope. I told him I could sell the van. 1,000, he choked out. 250,000. The floor seemed to tilt. I grabbed the counter to steady myself. $250,000. It was an impossible number. It was more than the shop was worth. More than our lives were worth. He wailed that he was going to be killed. That he was going to take his hands first. That's what they said he did. He took the hands so you couldn't hold cards anymore. Chime. The sound of the front door latch lifting was gentle. Delicate almost. A soft tinkle of brass against glass. It silenced my father instantly. He scrambled backward. He crab-walked until his back hit the cooler. His eyes were fixed on the entrance with pure, unadulterated terror. The air in the shop changed. The smell of potting soil and old roses vanished. It was overpowered by something sharp and cold. Like ozone. Like expensive cologne and gun oil. I turned slowly. 2 men stood on either side of the doorway. They were mountains in suits. Their necks were thick. Their expressions were blank. They scanned the shop with bored efficiency. Their hands were clasped loosely in front of them. But I didn't look at them. I couldn't look away from the man standing in the center. Stefano DeLuca. He was taller than I expected. He had to be over 6'3". He wore a charcoal gray suit that fit him so perfectly it looked like a second skin. A black shirt, no tie. The top button was undone to reveal a hint of tanned skin. His hair was black, swept back from a face that looked like it had been carved from marble. Handsome, but sharp, cruel. He didn't look like a thug. He looked like a CEO. He looked like a king. He stepped into the shop. The old floorboards groaned under his weight. He said my father's name. Arthur. His voice was a physical thing. A low rumble that vibrated in the floor, in the walls, in the hollow space of my chest. It wasn't angry. It was calm, which was infinitely more terrifying. My father whimpered. He begged. He pleaded for more time. Stefano didn't look at my father. He looked at me. His eyes were the color of slate. Gray, flat, impenetrable. They swept over me. They took in everything in a single, clinical glance. My messy bun with loose strands falling in my face. My dirt-stained apron. My worn-out sneakers with the hole in the toe. He looked at my hands, still holding the spray bottle. He walked toward the counter. I stood my ground, even though every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. He stopped inches from me. He reached out. I flinched. I expected a strike. He ignored me. He reached past me and touched the head of a dying hydrangea. He rubbed a brown petal between his thumb and forefinger. He noted the nitrogen deficiency softly. I stared at him. My mouth was slightly open. He dropped the petal and explained that the browning edges meant they were starving. I needed to fix the pH of the soil. He looked at me then. Up close, his eyes were terrifying. There was no soul in them, just calculation. He asked if I was the daughter. I managed to say my name. Violet. My voice didn't shake. It felt like a miracle. He repeated it. He tasted the name. Appropriate. He placed a small black leather ledger on the counter. He stated that my father owed $250,000. The deadline was noon today. It was now 12:05. My father shouted from the floor that he could get it. That he had a lead. A new job. He just needed a week. Stefano didn't turn around. He kept his eyes on me. He said simply that he lies. He has no job. He has no leads. He has maxed out his credit at every casino in Atlantic City. He has borrowed from every shark in Brooklyn. Stefano tapped the ledger. A large silver ring on his pinky finger caught the light. The debt was called. He signaled to the men at the door with a slight tilt of his head. They stepped forward. Their shadows stretched long across the floor. My father scrambled up. He knocked over a display of vases. Glass shattered everywhere. Shards scattered across the floor like diamonds. They crunched under his feet. He screamed to wait. That he had something else. That he had collateral. Stefano paused. He looked at the broken glass with mild annoyance, as if the mess offended him more than the pleading. He told Arthur he had nothing. His house was mortgaged to the hilt. The shop was drowning in debt. He was empty. My father shouted that it wasn't money. Panic made him shrill. He pointed a shaking finger. He pointed at me. He gasped out one word. The world stopped. The hum of the refrigerator. The traffic outside. The sound of my own heart. It all went silent. The only thing I could hear was the ringing in my ears. I turned to look at my father. I wanted him to be joking. I wanted him to be insane. But his eyes were clear. They were focused on his own survival. I whispered, "Dad." He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was looking at Stefano with desperate hope. He listed my virtues like livestock. I was the best thing he had. I worked hard. I kept the place running. I knew flowers. I could cook. I could clean. I was obedient. Obedient. Like I was a dog. Like I was a horse he was trading at the track. I shouted at him to stop. To tell me what he was doing. He rushed on, ignoring me completely. He offered me as collateral. Said I could work off the interest. Just keep me until he got the cash. 6 months. Give him 6 months. Stefano went very still. For a long moment, nobody moved. The silence stretched. Heavy. Suffocating. Stefano looked from my father. Sweating and pathetic among the broken glass. To me. He stepped closer to me. I could smell him now. Sandalwood, rain, and the metallic tang of fear coming off my father. He reached out. This time, he didn't touch a flower. He took my hand. His fingers were rough, warm, calloused. He turned my hand palm up. He ran his thumb over the rough skin of my palm, over the small cuts from the rose thorns, over the dirt under my nails. He examined my hand like he was reading a map. He noted softly that I worked hard. It wasn't a question. I tried to pull my hand away, but his grip tightened. Not painful, but absolute. Like a steel trap. I hissed that I ran this shop. I paid his debts. But I was not currency. Stefano's eyes met mine. For a second, just a split second, I saw something flicker in that slate-gray gaze. Surprise. Pity. It was gone before I could name it. Replaced by the ice. He told me everyone is currency. It just depends on the exchange rate. He dropped my hand and looked at my father. The disgust on his face was visceral. He looked at Arthur like he was something he had scraped off his shoe. He called him a worm, trading his own flesh and blood to save his skin. My father pleaded if it was a deal, if it covered the interest, if he took me, and he got 6 months. I held my breath. Surely this man, this powerful, terrifying crime boss, agreed to something so barbaric. Surely he had a code. Stefano looked at me again. He looked at the door. He looked at the street outside, where a black sedan was idling. Then, he nodded. He said it was a deal. My knees gave out. I stumbled back. I caught myself on the counter. I breathed that he couldn't do this. That this wasn't legal. He couldn't just take people. Stefano paused. He addressed me as Miss Violet. He dropped his voice an octave and said that in his world, a contract is law. My father had signed me over. I yelled that I didn't sign anything. I looked at my father. Tears were burning my eyes. I begged him to tell him no. My father looked at his shoes. He mumbled that it was only for a while. Just until he got the money. I'd be safe there. It was a nice house. A mansion. Better than the apartment. I screamed that he was selling me. To a mobster. He claimed it was the only way. Did I want him to die? I screamed back that maybe I did. Maybe he should have thought about that before he bet our lives on a horse. Stefano stepped between us. He blocked my father from my view. He was a wall of dark fabric and muscle. He ordered me to get my things. I said no. He looked down at me. That wasn't a request. I told him I was not going with him. I grabbed the pruning shears from the counter. It was a ridiculous threat against a man like him, against the 2 giants at the door. But panic makes you do stupid things. I pointed the blades at his chest. I told him to get out of my shop. The guards at the door shifted. They reached for their jackets. Stefano raised a hand. He stopped them. He didn't blink. He didn't even look at the shears. He looked right into my eyes. He murmured that I had fire. Good. I would need it. He moved faster than I could process. One moment he was standing there. The next, his hand was wrapped around my wrist, the one holding the shears. He squeezed. A sharp pressure point. My fingers went numb. The shears clattered to the floor. He didn't let go. He pulled me closer until his chest brushed against me. He whispered for me to listen. His voice was so low, only I could hear it. I had 2 choices. I walk out that door with him, quietly, and my father lives to see another sunrise. Or I fight him, and his men leave him bleeding out on this linoleum. I stared at him. I searched for a bluff. I found none. I whispered that he sold me. The tears finally spilled over. Stefano agreed. He did. Now decide. His life, or my freedom. I looked past Stefano's shoulder at the man cowering by the roses. He was wiping sweat from his face. He looked relieved. He actually looked relieved that I was being taken. Something snapped inside me. It wasn't a loud crack. It was a quiet severance. The man who read me bedtime stories was gone. The man standing there wasn't Dad anymore. He was just Arthur, and he had just sold me to save his own skin. I dropped my head. I said I didn't have anything to pack. Stefano said good. I wouldn't need anything from this life where I was going. He didn't let go of my wrist. He turned and marched me toward the door. Arthur called out to wait. Asked if the debt was cleared for 6 months. Stefano stopped. He didn't turn around. He said to the empty air that if he was still in this city in 1 hour, the deal was void. And he would come for his hands. He pushed me out into the blinding afternoon sun. The heat hit me like a slap. Passers-by were walking on the sidewalk, a woman with a stroller, a businessman on his phone. I wanted to scream. I wanted to yell, "Help me. I'm being kidnapped." But Stefano's hand was a manacle on my wrist. His bodyguards flanked us instantly. They created a wall of suits that hid me from the world. They opened the back door of the black SUV. Stefano told me to get in. I looked at the car. It looked less like a car, and more like a hearse. I asked where he was taking me. My voice was trembling. He said home. I asked who's home. He looked at me. His face was unreadable. His eyes reflected the gray clouds gathering above us. He said mine. From this moment on, my life answered to his. He put a hand on top of my head and guided me into the car. The door slammed shut. It sealed me in silence. It sealed me in darkness. As the engine roared to life and we pulled away from the curb, I turned to look through the tinted rear window. I saw Arthur stumble out of the shop. He looked left and right. He was clutching his bag. He didn't look at the car. He ran in the opposite direction. He ran away from me. I sat back against the leather seat. I pulled my knees to my chest. I didn't look at the man sitting next to me. I sat in the corner, trying to make myself as small as possible. The car turned onto the highway. We were speeding toward the hills where the rich and the dangerous lived. I closed my eyes. I prayed that the stories about the silencer were wrong. I prayed he just wanted a maid, a gardener. But as the city faded behind us, I had a sinking feeling that my father hadn't just sold my labor. He had sold my life. I just didn't know yet that he had sold me to the only man who could save it. Part 2, the stone garden. The drive took 40 minutes. 40 minutes of silence, so heavy it felt like it had physical weight. It pressed against my eardrums. It suffocated the air in the back of the SUV. I sat pressed against the door. My hand gripped the handle so hard my knuckles turned white. I was trying to memorize the route. Left at the old oak. Right onto the highway. Exit 42 toward the cliffs. I told myself I was planning my escape. I told myself I wouldn't be here long enough to unpack. But as the city grime gave way to manicured hedges and iron gates, a cold dread settled in my stomach. We were climbing into the hills, into the territory of the untouchables. The houses here weren't houses, they were compounds. Fortresses disguised as luxury villas. When the black SUV finally slowed, it wasn't in front of a warm family home. It was a monolith of gray stone and steel. The gates opened automatically. Cameras buzzed like angry hornets as they tracked the car's movement. We rolled up a long, winding driveway lined with cypress trees that looked too perfect. Too uniform. Soldiers standing at attention. There wasn't a single flower in sight. No color, just green, gray, and black. The car stopped. The lock clicked. Out, the command was simple, devoid of warmth. I stepped out onto the gravel. My legs were shaking. The air up here was thinner, colder. I was still wearing my apron from the shop. I still had dirt under my fingernails from the morning shift. I felt absurdly small against the backdrop of the massive house. Stefano welcomed me home. The words sounded less like a greeting and more like a sentence. He didn't wait for me. He walked toward the massive double doors. He expected me to follow, like a dog. And because the two mountains in suits, Marco and Luca, were standing behind me, I did. The inside was worse than the outside. It was breathtakingly expensive. Marble floors that reflected the ceiling like a dark pool. Modern art that looked like violent slashes of red and black paint. Furniture that looked too sharp, too uncomfortable to sit on. But it was cold, not just temperature-wise, though the air conditioning was humming at a meat locker chill. It was emotionally cold. There were no photos on the walls, no coats on the rack, no mail on the table. It was a house where no one lived, they just existed. It smelled of lemon polish and silence. Stefano walked through the foyer without pausing. His footsteps echoed on the marble. He listed the rules without turning around. His voice echoed off the vaulted ceiling. I would have the East Wing guest suite. It had an attached bath. I was expected to keep it clean myself. I muttered that I thought I was a prisoner, not a maid. I hugged my arms to my chest. He ignored me. He continued the rules. I was not permitted in his office. I was not permitted in the basement levels. I was not permitted near the perimeter gates without an escort. If I attempted to scale the walls, the sensors would trigger a lockdown, and the dogs would be released. I stopped walking. Dogs. He stopped then. He turned slowly. He pinned me with that unreadable, slate-gray expression. German shepherds, trained to stop intruders. They didn't know me yet. I shouldn't test them. I asked if I was a prisoner. My voice was trembling, but loud enough to echo. He called this a home, but it felt like a jail. He looked at me. For a moment, he looked almost tired. He said I was a guest with significant restrictions. Not to test them. For my own safety. For my safety. The lie tasted bitter. He wasn't keeping me safe. He was keeping his collateral secure. He told me to come. He turned toward a set of glass doors at the back of the house. He wanted to show me my workspace. I hurried to catch up. My sneakers squeaked on the pristine floor. I thought I was here to be whatever he wanted. A servant. He said he had cleaners. He didn't need me to scrub toilets. He pushed open the glass doors. The heat hit me instantly. We stepped out onto a stone patio that overlooked the grounds. The backyard was massive, a sprawling lawn that ended at a high stone wall. But there, tucked away in the corner of the estate, half hidden by overgrown ivy, was a structure that looked like a skeleton. It was a Victorian-style conservatory, a massive greenhouse made of iron and glass. But the glass was grime-streaked, covered in moss. The iron was rusting. Inside, even from here, I could see a jungle of brown, withered vines choking the life out of whatever had once grown there. It was a graveyard of plants. Stefano walked across the lawn. The grass was perfectly cut, but it felt spongy and damp. I followed him to the door of the greenhouse. He stared at it. For the first time since he walked into my shop, his posture changed. His shoulders slumped just a fraction. The tension in his jaw loosed. He said quietly that his mother built this. I looked at the dead, gray stems pressed against the glass. It looked like no one had been inside in years. 10 years, he corrected. Since the day she died. He reached out and touched the rusted handle. But he didn't turn it. He treated it like a relic. Like a tomb. Then the vulnerability vanished. The steel mask returned. He turned to me. His eyes were hard again. This was my job. I would clear the rot. I would replant. I would make it bloom again. I stared at the massive, dying structure. It was a monumental task. It would take months of hard labor just to clear the deadwood. I asked what if I did? If I fixed it? Would he let me go? Stefano looked at me. He stepped closer. He invaded my personal space until I had to tilt my head back to look at him. The smell of sandalwood and rain filled my lungs. It overwhelmed the scent of the dead garden. He told me to fix the garden. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy set of iron keys. He dropped them into my hand. They were cold, heavy, rusted. Then we would talk about freedom. He turned and walked back toward the house. He left me alone with the ghosts of his mother's flowers. 2 weeks later, the silence was the loudest thing in the house. Every night at 7:00 p.m. exactly, a chime would sound. I was expected to be in the dining room. I sat at the long mahogany table. A table meant for 20 people, but set for 2. Stefano sat at the head. He was dressed in his crisp suits, usually reading documents or scrolling on a tablet while he ate. I sat on his right, picking at food that was too rich for my stomach: braised lamb, truffle risotto, wines that probably cost more than my father's car. He never spoke. He never asked about my day. He never asked about the greenhouse. He just existed near me, a brooding storm cloud in a charcoal suit. I spent my days in the conservatory. It was grueling, backbreaking work. I tore down dead vines until my hands were raw. I hauled bags of rotting soil until my back screamed. I scrubbed 10 years of algae off the glass panes until the sun finally broke through. But I loved it. It was the only place in this cold, stone prison where I felt like myself. It was the only place where I wasn't the collateral. I was just Violet. The florist. I had started with the roses. They were ancient bushes, gnarled, woody, suffocated by weeds. I pruned the dead wood. I cut them back to the base, praying there was still life in the roots. It was focused work, meditative, until tonight. Ouch, the hiss escaped my lips before I could stop it. My fork clattered against the fine china plate. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the cavernous dining room. Stefano stopped eating instantly. He didn't look up slowly. He froze. His entire body went rigid. He lowered the document he was reading. His eyes landed on my hand. A drop of bright red blood was welling up on my index finger. A thorn from the black baccarat roses had gone deep earlier that day. It had buried itself under the skin. I had dug it out, but the movement of cutting my steak had reopened the wound. He demanded to see. I grabbed my linen napkin to hide it. I said it was nothing, just a scratch. I was fine. He said my name. Violet, his voice was a low warning. A rumble of thunder. He stood up. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. I still expected violence. Every time he moved too fast, I saw the man who had crushed my father's spirit in the flower shop. I saw the man who commanded an army. He walked around the table. He didn't stop until he was standing right next to my chair. He smelled of expensive scotch and danger. He pulled the chair out next to me and sat down. He didn't ask permission. He reached out and took my hand. His touch was electric. He didn't pull. He didn't squeeze. He held my hand like it was made of spun glass. He unwrapped the napkin I was clutching. He revealed the angry, swollen cut on my finger. The blood was stark against my pale skin. He frowned. The expression made him look younger, less like a monster, and more like a man who was confused by the sight of pain. He murmured that I needed to wear gloves. He inspected the cut. I defended myself weakly. I couldn't feel the roots with gloves on. I needed to know which parts were dead and which were alive. He didn't argue. He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a pristine white handkerchief. It was silk, monogrammed, SD. He poured a little water from his crystal goblet onto the cloth. He gently, painfully gently, dabbed the blood away. I watched him, mesmerized. This was the hand that held a gun. This was the hand that signed death warrants. And yet, he was cleaning a gardener's cut with the focus of a surgeon. I whispered why. He paused. The cloth hovered over my skin. He looked up. His gray eyes met mine. So close I could see the flecks of gold in the slate. He asked why what? I asked why he was doing this. I searched his face for a crack in the armor. He bought me. I was his servant. He shouldn't care if I bled. He shouldn't care if I hurt. Stefano's jaw tightened. A muscle jumped in his cheek. He wrapped the handkerchief around my finger. He tied it in a neat, efficient knot. He said quietly that he didn't buy a servant. The words hung in the air. Heavy. Loaded. I challenged him then. What was I? He stood up abruptly. The moment of intimacy shattered like glass. The mask slammed back down. He looked down at me. Cold. Distant again. He told me to finish my dinner. And wear the damn gloves. He walked out of the room without looking back. I sat there, alone at the massive table. I stared at the white silk handkerchief tied around my dirty, calloused finger. It smelled like him. And for the first time in 2 weeks, I didn't feel fear. I felt confused. The following Tuesday, the crack in the armor was small. But it was there. I caught him watching me from his office window while I worked in the garden. I saw him leave a new set of high-end Japanese pruning shears on the bench without a note. But I couldn't let myself soften. He was still my jailer. And the world outside, the walls, was still dangerous. I just didn't realize how dangerous until Tuesday. I was working near the front gate, pruning the hedges that lined the perimeter wall. The heavy iron gates were closed, but I could see the road through the bars. It was a public road, but rarely used. I was humming to myself, lost in the rhythm of the work. Then I heard an engine. It wasn't the smooth purr of Stefano's SUVs. It was a rattle, a cough. A beat-up gray sedan slowed down as it approached the gate. It crawled to a stop right in front of where I was standing. I froze. The shears were in my hand. The window rolled down. The smell hit me first. Stale, cheap tobacco. Unwashed clothes. It drifted through the iron bars. It polluted the clean mountain air. A man was sitting in the driver's seat. He had a thick neck, a face that looked like it had been rearranged by a baseball bat. His nose was crooked. A jagged white scar ran from his ear to his chin, pulling his lip into a permanent sneer. He wasn't Italian. He didn't have the polished look of Stefano's men. He looked rough, hungry. He looked at me. His eyes crawled over my body, lingering on my legs, my chest. I felt like I needed a shower. He rasped out that the rumors were true. The silencer got himself a little pet. I stepped back. My heart hammered against my ribs. I gripped the shears tighter. I told him to go away. He laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound. Feisty. He liked that. Arthur said I was quiet. Said I was obedient. My stomach dropped. I asked if he knew my father. He grinned, revealed a gold tooth that glinted in the sun. He owned a piece of him, just like the boss did, just like everyone did. He leaned out the window. He rested his arm on the door. He told me to tell my daddy hello, to tell Arthur the Irish haven't forgotten. The Irish. The name sent a shiver down my spine. My father hadn't just borrowed from the Italians. He had borrowed from everyone. The man's voice dropped to a whisper that carried through the gate. He said they knew where he was. And they knew where I was. Pretty little thing like me. Shame I was locked up in there. We could have so much fun. The threat hung in the air, thick and oily. A shout came from behind me. I spun around. Marco and Luca, the two guards who usually stood by the front door like statues, were sprinting across the lawn. They didn't look bored anymore. They looked like predators. They were moving fast. Their hands were already inside their jackets, reaching for weapons. Marco roared at me to get away from the gate. The man in the car cursed. He spat a wad of phlegm out the window. It landed right at the base of the gate. He called out, "Tick-tock, little flower." He slammed on the gas. The sedan screeched away, tires spinning on the asphalt, disappearing down the hill in a cloud of exhaust. Marco reached me first. He put himself between me and the gate. His gun was half drawn. He scanned the road. He was breathing hard. He asked urgently if he touched me, if he spoke to me. I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the shears. I told him he asked about my father. He said the Irish haven't forgotten. Luca was already on his radio. He was speaking in rapid-fire Italian about a perimeter breach. "Sector 4. Irish plates. Get the boss." I grabbed Luca's arm. I begged him not to tell Stefano. "Please." I didn't know what he'd do. Marco looked at me. The hardness in his face softened into something like pity. He holstered his gun, but kept his hand near it. He said gently that the boss already knew. The cameras saw everything. I looked back at the house. Up on the second floor, the balcony doors to the master bedroom were open. Stefano was standing there. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar. His sleeves were rolled up to his elbows. He was gripping the stone railing so hard, I could see the tendons in his forearms straining. Even from this distance, and I could feel the rage. It radiated off him like heat from a furnace. But he wasn't looking at the road where the car had fled. He wasn't looking at his guards. He was looking at me. And for the first time, behind the rage, behind the coldness, he looked terrified. He pushed off the railing and disappeared back into the room. I stood there in the grass. The smell of the Irishman's cigarette smoke still lingered in the air. That was the moment the question first planted itself in my mind. The seed of doubt that would eventually shatter everything I thought I knew. The man at the gate, the Irishman, he wanted to hurt me. He wanted to take me. He spoke about me like I was a toy to be broken. Stefano had locked me in. He had put me behind stone walls and iron gates and cameras. For 2 weeks, I had looked at those walls and hated them. I had seen them as a cage, designed to keep a prisoner from running. But as I looked up at the empty balcony, remembering the look of terror on the face of the most dangerous man in the city, the thought struck me, was he keeping me in? Or was he keeping them out? Part 3. The roots revealed 3 weeks later the sky turned black at noon. It wasn't a gradual darkening. One moment, the sun was fighting through the humidity of late July. The next, a wall of charcoal clouds rolled over the hills. It swallowed the light. The birds stopped singing. The wind picked up. It whistled through the iron skeleton of the conservatory with a sound like a low, mournful flute. I was repotting the ferns in the back corner. My hands were buried in cool, damp soil. I paused. I looked up at the glass roof. The first drop hit the pane directly above my head. Tink. Then the heavens opened. It wasn't rain, it was a deluge. The storm battered the estate with a violence that made the stone walls of the main house look blurry in the distance. But inside the conservatory, it sounded like the end of the world. Thousands of rain droplets hammered against the glass. A deafening roar of water and wind. The old iron beams groaned under the assault. I dropped the trowel. My heart kicked against my ribs. I hated storms. They didn't just scare me, they paralyzed me. They dragged me back to the nights in our thin-walled apartment when my father wouldn't come home. The nights when the thunder would shake the windows in their frames. I would hide under my bed, clutching a pillow, convinced that the noise was the sound of the world breaking apart. Convinced that he was lying in a ditch somewhere. And I was all alone in the dark. Crack. A bolt of lightning split the sky. Jagged. Blinding. It illuminated the garden in a harsh, strobe light white. It turned the roses into gray ghosts. Thunder followed instantly, a physical blow that rattled my teeth. Then, darkness. The perimeter lights died. The lights in the main house winked out. The generator usually kicked in immediately, but this time, nothing. Just the screaming wind and the oppressive, heavy dark. I scrambled backward. I knocked over a clay pot. It shattered, but the sound was lost in the roar of the rain. I huddled in the corner near the potting bench. I pulled my knees to my chest. I buried my face in my muddy hands. I whispered to myself to breathe. It was just noise. I was safe. I was not 7 years old. I was safe, but I didn't feel safe. I felt trapped in a glass cage that was about to shatter. I squeezed my eyes shut. I counted the seconds between the thunderclaps, waiting for the inevitable crash of glass. A door opened. I didn't hear it. The storm was too loud. I felt it. A change in air pressure. A gust of wet, cold wind that cut through the humidity of the greenhouse. A beam of light sliced through the darkness. It swept over the rows of sleeping roses, over the workbench, and then it landed on me. Violet, the voice was deep. It cut through the chaos. Stefano. He was holding a heavy, tactical flashlight. He lowered the beam instantly so it wouldn't blind me. Aiming it at the floor, he walked toward me. His footsteps were heavy and fast on the stone pavers. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His white dress shirt was soaked through, plastered to his chest and arms, turning the fabric translucent. His hair was dripping, black strands falling into his eyes. He had run. He had run from the safety of the main house, through the deluge, to get here. He said the generator circuit tripped. It would reset in 60 seconds. I couldn't answer. Another clap of thunder shook the ground beneath us. A small, pathetic whimper escaped my throat. I couldn't stop it. Stefano froze. He stood over me, a dripping giant in the shadows. He looked down at me, shaking, covered in dirt, curled into a ball on the floor. He didn't tell me to get up. He didn't tell me to stop being weak. He didn't mock me. He sat down, right there on the dirty stone floor, in his expensive trousers. He sat down next to me. He placed the flashlight on the ground, lens up, so it cast a soft, ambient glow on the ceiling. Like a campfire. He said quietly that his mother hated storms too. The unexpectedness of the words made me uncurl slightly. I looked at him sideways. His profile was illuminated by the flashlight. Sharp, angular, but the tension around his eyes was gone. I whispered she did. He said she was terrified of them. She used to say the thunder was God moving furniture. She would hide in here. She said the glass was thick enough to keep the world out. He turned his head to look at me. He admitted she was wrong, of course. Glass is fragile, but she felt safe here. He reached out. His movement was slow, telegraphed so I wouldn't flinch. He placed a hand over the ear facing him. Then he reached around and covered the other one. His palms were warm, large. They created a seal against the world. He pressed gently. The screaming wind muffled instantly. The thunder became a dull thud, a vibration rather than a sound. The chaos receded. It was replaced by a sudden, heavy quiet. The only thing I could hear was the rush of my own blood in my ears, and the steady rhythm of his breathing. I stared at him. He was watching me, his slate-gray eyes searching my face. There was no coldness in them now. No silencer, just a man who saw that I was scared, and offered his hands as a shelter. We sat like that for a long time. The monster of the city, shielding the florist from the noise. I leaned into his touch. I couldn't help it. My body gravitated toward his heat. My forehead rested against his wet shoulder. He smelled of rain and ozone, and that deep, woodsy sandalwood scent that I had started to associate with safety. I asked again why. My voice was muffled against his shirt. He didn't remove his hands. Why what? I whispered why he agreed to the deal. He had money. He had power. He could have hired 100 gardeners. He didn't need to take a hostage. Somewhere deep in the estate, a mechanical hum vibrated through the floor. The generator kicked in. The perimeter lights outside flickered. Then they blazed to life, flooding the conservatory with artificial twilight. Stefano dropped his hands. The sound of the rain rushed back in, but it wasn't as scary now. I felt anchored. He didn't move away, though. He stayed sitting on the floor. His knees almost touched mine. He looked at the roses I had pruned, the ones that were showing the first tiny green buds of new life against the dead wood. He told me to look at this place. Before I came, it was a tomb. Dead vines, rotted roots, silence. He looked down at his own hands, hands that were scarred, strong, and capable of terrible violence. He said softly that everything he touches, it breaks, it dies, or it fears him. That was his life. He was a weapon. He was effective, but he was not. Soft. He turned his gaze back to me. The gray ice in his eyes had melted. It revealed something deep and exhausted, a loneliness so vast it took my breath away. He whispered that he needed something that wasn't broken. He needed to see if something could survive him. My breath hitched. The air between us crackled, hotter than the lightning outside. I told him I was surviving. It was a promise. His gaze dropped to my lips, then back to my eyes. He reached out. His thumb brushed a smudge of dirt from my cheek. His touch was fire. He murmured, "Yes. You are blooming." For a second, I thought he was going to kiss me. I wanted him to. God help me, I wanted the man who bought me to kiss me. I leaned forward. My eyelids fluttered shut. He stood up. The movement was abrupt, jarring. The connection severed. The mask slammed back down over his face. Iron and steel. He said the storm was passing. His voice was hard again. He told me to go to my room. It was late. I would catch a cold sitting in these wet clothes. He turned and walked away into the rain. His stride was long and fast. He left me alone on the floor with the flashlight and the roses. The discovery 2 days later, the air in the house had shifted. Stefano was gone before sunrise. I heard his car leave, the tires crunching on the gravel at 4:00 a.m. When I went down for breakfast, the house felt different. Tenser. The security team was on high alert. There were double guards at the gate. Men I didn't recognize were patrolling the perimeter, with rifles slung over their shoulders. Marco was pacing the foyer, talking into his radio in hushed, angry Italian. Something was happening. I tried to ask Marco, but he just gave me a tight smile and told me to stay inside. Boss's orders. No gardening today. Too much. Wind. It wasn't windy. By noon, the confinement was making me itch. I needed to move. I needed to do something other than stare at the walls of my suite. I picked a vase of fresh lilies from the arrangement in the dining room. Stefano liked lilies, though he never admitted it, and decided to replace the wilting ones on the console table in the West Wing hallway. I knew the rule. You are not permitted in my office. But the West Wing hallway wasn't the office. It was just near it. I walked softly down the corridor. The house was silent. The guards were all outside. The door to Stefano's study was ajar. Just an inch. A sliver of darkness against the white hallway. I slowed down. I should turn back. I should just put the flowers down and run. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. It pulls you in like a riptide. I crept closer. Through the crack, I could see his massive mahogany desk. It was cluttered with papers, unusual for him. He was usually meticulously neat. But it was the files sitting on the edge of the desk that caught my eye. It wasn't in a folder. It was a single, glossy photograph lying face up. It was a picture of my father. My heart stopped. The vase of lilies grew heavy in my hands. I looked down the hallway. Empty. I pushed the door open. I stepped into the room. It smelled of leather and whiskey and him. I moved to the desk. My hands were shaking. I set the vase down. I picked up the photo. It was grainy, taken with a long-range surveillance lens. It showed my father, Arthur, standing in an alleyway behind the flower shop. He looked terrified, sweating, his hands raised. But it was who he was shaking hands with that made my stomach turn. It was the man from the car, the Irish thug with the scar. I stared at the image. My father knew him. They weren't strangers. They were meeting. I looked at the desk. Under the photo was a stack of papers. Phone transcripts, bank transfer records, timestamps. I picked up the top sheet. It was a surveillance log. Subject Arthur Vance. Location 42nd Street Alley. Date March 12th. Time 14:00. I froze. March 12th. I did the math in my head. Stefano came to the shop on March 15th. March 12th was 3 days before Stefano collected the debt. 3 days before he walked into my life. The voice was low. Deadly. What are you doing? I spun around. I dropped the paper. Stefano was standing in the doorway. He looked exhausted. There were dark bruises under his eyes. His tie was undone, hanging loose around his neck. He looked like he hadn't slept in 48 hours. But his expression was terrifying. It was the face of the silencer. I whispered that he knew. I held up the photo. My voice trembled. He knew him. Stefano walked into the room. He closed the door behind him with a soft click that sounded like a lock engaging. He told me to put that down. I accused him of watching him. My fear turned into a hot, sharp anger. He was stalking us. Before he even walked into the shop, he had cameras on him. He targeted him. Stefano said calmly that he monitors all threats in his territory. He advanced on me. I threw the photo onto the desk. It slid across the wood. It hit the vase. I shouted that my father wasn't a threat. He was a gambler. A pathetic, addicted old man. Did he set him up? Did he orchestrate this? Did he ruin him just so he could own me? Stefano stopped. He laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound that had no humor in it. He asked if I thought he wanted this. Did I think he woke up one morning and decided he wanted a hostage in his house? A florist who questions his every move. I screamed, why then? Why did he take me? If it wasn't for the money, why? Stefano roared. Because he sold you. The volume of his voice made me flinch physically. He never shouted. He never lost control. He slammed his hand down on the desk, right on top of the photo. He told me to look at the picture. Look at who he is shaking hands with. Did I know who that was? I said it was the Irish mob. My voice was shaking. The man at the gate. He said my father owed them money too. Stefano said no. His voice dropped to a hiss. He didn't owe them money. He didn't have money. He had nothing left to give them. Stefano yanked another paper from the stack. He shoved it into my hands. He ordered me to read it. I didn't want to. He shouted for me to read it. I looked at the paper. It was a transcript of a phone recording. My eyes scanned the highlighted lines. The Irish thug told Arthur the debt was $200K. He pays or he bleeds. They were done waiting. Arthur swore he didn't have it. He couldn't get it. Then the thug told him to give them the girl. They had a buyer in flight. She's young, pretty. She'll clear his ledger in a year if she works the clubs in Bangkok. Arthur asked, if he gave her to them, the debt is gone. Entirely. Clean slate. He walks away free. Arthur agreed. Take her. Come to the shop on Friday. He'd have her ready. The paper slipped from my fingers. It fluttered to the floor like a dead leaf. It landed on the Persian rug. I whispered no. The room was spinning. The walls felt like they were closing in. No, that's a lie. He wouldn't. Stefano said ruthlessly that he had the audio recording if I wanted to hear his voice. He could play it for me. He could let me hear him barter my life for a clean slate. I backed away until my legs hit the leather chair. I collapsed into it, unable to stand. Bangkok, the clubs, trafficking. I choked out that he was going to sell me. The tears came then. Hot, fast, to them, to be used. Stefano said Friday. The Irish were coming on Friday night. He walked around the desk. He didn't touch me. He stood in front of me, a dark tower of truth in a world of lies. He intercepted the call on Tuesday. He went to the shop on Friday afternoon. He bought his debt from the tracks, so he had a legal claim. He made up a number he couldn't pay, one that forced his hand immediately. And he took me before the sun went down. I looked up at him through my tears. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. He hadn't kidnapped me to collect a debt. He hadn't taken me as a trophy. I whispered that he took me to hide me. He said steadily that the Irish cannot touch me here. Inside these walls, I was property of the DeLuca family. And in this city, no one touches what is his. It was the only way to keep me off that plane. I asked why. A sob ripped through my throat. Why didn't he tell me? Why did he let me hate him? For months, I've hated him. I've feared him. Why did he let me believe my father was just? Desperate. Stefano looked away. He looked at the window, at the gray sky that mirrored his eyes. He said softly that the truth breaks people. He saw how I looked at him. I loved him. He thought it was better for me to hate a monster I didn't know than to be destroyed by the monster I loved. He turned back to me. He played the villain, so I could keep my father. Silence stretched between us. The hatred I had nursed for months. The fear. The anger. It all evaporated. It left a hollow, aching space in my chest. My father was the monster. Stefano was the shield. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. I saw the exhaustion, the burden of carrying my safety in silence, the nobility of letting me despise him just to spare me this pain. I asked where he was. My voice was dead. Who, Arthur? Stefano hesitated. He gave him $10,000. He told him to leave the city. He told him if he ever came back, he would bury him. He sighed. He ran a hand through his hair. But gamblers, they don't run. They double down. Buzz. Stefano's phone vibrated on the mahogany desk. It was a jarring sound in the quiet room. He glanced at the screen. His face went pale. The blood drained from his skin. It left him looking like a statue. I stood up. I wiped my face. I asked what it was. Stefano grabbed his jacket. He threw it on in one fluid motion. He opened the top drawer of his desk and pulled out a gun. A black, sleek pistol. He said the guards at the gate just found him. My father, Stefano checked the chamber of the gun. He's here. And he brought the Irish with him. He looked at me. His eyes were full of a terrible, dark promise. The man who sold me had come to collect what he no longer owned. Part 4, the thorn's eye ran after him. Stefano ordered me to stay there. He checked the clip of his gun as he strode down the white marble hallway. His movements were efficient, predatory. He didn't look back. I scrambled to catch up. My sneakers squeaked on the floor. My heart was in my throat, a frantic bird battering against my ribs. I screamed that he was my father. I had to talk to him. Stefano growled that he wasn't my father anymore. He spun around at the front door. His eyes were wild, the pupils blown wide with adrenaline. He's the bait, Violet. Couldn't I see that? He's the bait. The alarm system began to blare. A low, rhythmic pulse that signaled a perimeter breach. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Red emergency, lights washed the foyer in the color of blood. I grabbed his arm. The muscle underneath, the suit jacket was rock hard. It vibrated with tension. I begged him to listen. If he's out there, he's in trouble. Let me tell him to leave. He'll listen to me. He's just scared. Stefano looked down at me. The conflict in his eyes was a war. He wanted to lock me in a vault. I could see him calculating the time it would take to drag me to the panic room versus the time he had before the Irish breached the inner circle. But he saw the desperation in my face. He saw that if he locked me away now, I would never forgive him. He told me to stay behind him. His voice dropped to that lethal whisper. If he said run, I run. I don't look back. I don't ask questions. I run to the greenhouse and lock the door. Did I understand? I nodded, unable to speak. He opened the massive front doors. We burst out into the storm. The deluge had slowed to a drizzle, but the air was thick with mist and the smell of wet asphalt. The driveway, usually a pristine ribbon of black, was a chaotic scene of shouting men and flashing lights. At the bottom of the hill, 200 yards away, the massive iron gates were standing wide open. The electronic lock had been blown. A gray van was parked sideways across the entrance, blocking the exit. And there, standing in the middle of the gravel drive, soaking wet and shivering, was Arthur. He looked small. He looked frail against the backdrop of the massive, menacing van and the dark woods beyond. He was clutching a duffel bag to his chest like a shield. I screamed, "Dad!" The word ripped out of my throat before I could stop it. He looked up. His face was a map of misery. One eye was swollen shut, purple and angry. His lip was split. When he saw me, he didn't look relieved. He didn't look happy. He looked guilty. He sobbed that he was sorry. His voice carried on the damp wind. They made him call me out. They said they'd break his legs. Stefano roared at me to get down. He shoved me hard. I stumbled behind a stone pillar just as the side door of the van slid open. Gunfire erupted. It was deafening. It wasn't like the movies. It was a chaotic, ear-splitting crackle that popped my ears. Bullets chipped the stone inches from my face. Shards of granite flew into my hair. I screamed. I covered my head. I curled into a ball in the wet grass. Stefano returned fire. He didn't duck. He stood his ground. He used the angle of the pillar for cover. His movements were precise and calm. He fired 2 shots. He shattered the windshield of the van. He shouted orders into his earpiece. Marco, flank left. Luca, suppressive fire. His security team was swarming from the side of the house, moving through the hedges like shadows. They opened fire, turning the driveway into a crossfire zone. But the Irish had numbers. Men poured out of the back of the van, wearing ski masks and tactical vests. They weren't just thugs, they were soldiers. And they grabbed my father. A man in a mask yanked Arthur by the collar, dragged him in front of him. He used my father's frail body as a human shield. I lunged forward. I grabbed the back of Stefano's jacket. I screamed not to shoot. He'll hit him. Stop. Stefano cursed. A vicious sound. He stopped firing immediately. He ducked back as a bullet shattered the terracotta flower pot next to us. Dirt and ceramic exploded over his polished shoes. He yelled over the gunfire that he led them here. He deactivated the gate code. That's how they got in. He gave them the access. I sobbed that he was scared. He didn't mean to. Stefano shouted back that he was a traitor. Suddenly, the shooting stopped. A voice boomed from the driveway. DeLuca, it was gravelly. Ugly. Familiar. The man holding my father ripped off his ski mask. It was him. The man from the car. The scar on his face twisted as he smiled. He had his arm around my father's neck. Choking him, a gun pressed to Arthur's temple. He yelled that they have the old man. They have the rat. Now here is the deal. Stefano stepped out from behind the pillar. He held his gun lowered, but ready. His body was a coiled spring. He called out that there is no deal. His voice was calm, terrifyingly final. They were trespassing on DeLuca land. They were all dead men walking. Let him go, and he might let them crawl away. The Irishman laughed. Tough talk for a man who's outnumbered. Here's the trade, DeLuca. The girl for the father. Right now, he sends the girl walking down this driveway, and they let the old man go. Or, he pressed the barrel of the gun harder into Arthur's temple. My father whimpered. His knees buckled. Or he paints the driveway with his brains. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of the rain and my father's sobbing. Stefano looked back at me. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were pleading with me to stay put. I was frozen. My father was going to die. Because of me. Because I was the asset. I was the currency. Stefano warned me to stay back. He stepped in front of me. But I couldn't. I couldn't watch him die. Even after everything. I stepped out from behind the pillar. Dad, Arthur looked at me. Tears were mixing with the rain and blood on his face. He looked at the gun at his head. Then at me. He choked out, Vi, tell him to let you go. Please. They said they won't hurt me if you come with them. The words hung in the wet air. They won't hurt me if you come. He wasn't asking for help. He wasn't apologizing. He was asking me to trade places. He was asking me to walk into a van full of men who wanted to traffic me, just so he could walk free. Even now, even with a gun to his head, he was selling me. Again, the final thread of hope, the tiny, childish part of me that wanted my daddy to love me more than he loved the gamble, snapped. It didn't hurt. It just felt like a weight falling off my shoulders. I whispered, "You did it again." It wasn't a question. It was a realization. He wailed that he had to. Snot ran down his nose. He didn't want to die. Please, Vi. I was young. I could handle it. Just go with them. You can handle it. Stefano moved. He didn't move toward the Irish. He didn't raise his gun. He moved in front of me. He put his entire body between me and the van. He blocked my view of my father. He became a wall. A shield. He said she isn't going anywhere. He wasn't shouting anymore. He was speaking to the Irishman, but the words were for me. She is not currency. She is not collateral. She is mine. The scar-faced man snarled. His patience snapped. Have it your way. He raised his gun. He moved it away from Arthur's head. He pointed it directly at me. No, Stefano didn't think. He didn't calculate. He lunged. He didn't fire his weapon. He turned his back to the shooter. He tackled me. He threw his arms around me, twisting his body in midair to cover mine, throwing us both to the wet gravel just as the gun went off. Bang! I hit the ground hard. The air was knocked out of my lungs. The sharp stones dug into my back. Stefano landed on top of me. Heavy, warm. His face was buried in my neck. I gasped his name. Stefano, I tried to catch my breath. He didn't move. Stefano, I pushed at his chest. His head was resting heavily on my shoulder. His breathing was wet, ragged. Then I felt it, the warmth spreading across my shirt, seeping through his jacket. Hot, sticky, not rain, blood. Marco screamed from somewhere to my left. Target down. Boss is down." His voice was filled with a panic I had never heard before. The security team unleashed hell. Without Stefano holding them back to save my father, they opened fire with everything they had. They didn't care about the hostage anymore. They only cared about their fallen king. The van was riddled with bullets. The windshield disintegrated. The Irishmen dropped. The scar-faced man fell backward, his chest a ruin. My father scrambled away. He didn't run toward us. He didn't check on me. He crawled on his hands and knees into the bushes like a rat, disappearing into the dark woods. I didn't watch him go. I didn't care. "Stefano," I screamed. I rolled him off me. His face was pale, turning gray in the dim light. His eyes were half closed. The bullet had hit him high in the back, exiting through the shoulder near the collarbone. It was bad. There was so much blood. It soaked his white shirt, turning it crimson. I pressed my hands against the wound. I tried to stem the flow. The blood pumped between my fingers. Hot. Terrifying. I screamed for help. "Somebody help us." His eyelids fluttered. His slate-gray eyes found mine. They were hazy, losing focus. He wheezed my name. "Violet." Blood bubbled at the corner of his lips. I sobbed that I was here. I smoothed the wet hair back from his forehead. "Don't talk. Marco is calling the ambulance." He was going to be okay. He reached up. His hand, stained with his own blood and the mud from the driveway, touched my cheek. His thumb brushed away a tear. He whispered that he told me. A faint ghost of a smile touched his lips. "To stay. In the garden." His hand dropped. His eyes closed. His head lolled to the side. I screamed no. I shook him. No. He didn't get to die. He didn't get to be the hero now. "Wake up." Marco was there, pulling me away. His hands were gentle but firm. Miss, we need to move him. The medic is here. Let him work." I fought them. I kicked and screamed. I wouldn't let go of his hand. He saved me. He saved me. They loaded him onto a stretcher. I ran alongside it, holding his hand until they forced me into the waiting car. As we sped away toward the private hospital, leaving the carnage of the driveway behind, I realized something. My father had sold me to save himself. Stefano had died, or was dying to save me. The villain was the hero. And the hero was the man I loved. 2 days later, the hospital room was quiet. The only sound was the rhythmic, hypnotic beep. Beep. Beep of the heart monitor. It was a private suite, more like a hotel room than a hospital. But the smell was the same. Antiseptic. Latex. Fear. I sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair next to the bed, holding Stefano's hand. I hadn't left. I hadn't showered. I was still wearing the jeans with his blood dried on the knee, a rusty brown stain that I refused to wash out. The doctors said he was lucky. The bullet had missed the subclavian artery by millimeters. He had lost a lot of blood, but he was strong. He would heal. I looked at his face in repose. The harsh lines of the silencer were smoothed out by the painkillers. He didn't look like a mob boss. He just looked like a man. The man who had bought my debt. The man who had cleaned my cut with his handkerchief. The man who had taken a bullet meant for me. His fingers twitched in mine. I sat up straight. My heart leaped. Stefano, his eyelids fluttered. Slowly, painfully, they opened. Slate-gray eyes focused on the ceiling, confused for a moment, before drifting down to find me. He blinked. He looked at me, messy hair, blood-stained clothes, dark circles under my eyes. He rasped that I was still here. His voice was like gravel, wrecked from the intubation tube. I asked where else I would be. My voice broke. I brought his hand to my lips and kissed the knuckles. He squeezed my hand. Weakly, but it was there. He said the gate was open. My father ran. I said I know. Marco told me. He asked if they caught him. I told him they found him at the bus station 2 hours later. Marco called me. He asked what I wanted them to do. Stefano waited. He watched me with intensity, gauging my reaction. I told him I let him go. Stefano's eyebrows drew together. I told them to give him a ticket to Las Vegas. One way. And I told them to give him a message. If I ever see his face in the city again, if he ever calls me or writes to me or tries to find me, I will let Marco handle it. Stefano exhaled, a long, slow breath that seemed to deflate his chest. He said I showed mercy. I corrected him. I showed indifference. I don't hate him anymore, Stefano. Hate takes energy. I don't care. He's a ghost to me. I leaned forward. I rested my forehead against our joined hands. I whispered that he took a bullet for me. He murmured that it seemed appropriate. Collateral protection. I laughed. A wet choke sound. You could have died. He said better him than the garden. I looked up at him. The debt is gone, Stefano. My father is gone. The contract is void. You fulfilled your end of the bargain. You kept me safe. He looked away. A shadow passed over his face. He started to pull his hand away from mine. He knew. I was free to go, Violet. His men would drive me back to my apartment. He would have the deed to the shop transferred to my name. I was clear. He was letting me go. After everything, he was opening the cage door. I told him I wasn't going anywhere. He froze. He looked back at me, confusion warring with hope in his eyes. He asked what? I gripped his hand tighter. I still have a job to do. The roses aren't in full bloom yet. And the greenhouse. It still needs work. The roof leaks when it storms. I stood up. I leaned over the bed. I kissed his forehead, right on the faint scar above his eyebrow. I whispered against his skin that besides, I think I finally found a home where the walls are meant to keep the bad things out. And I'm not leaving it. Stefano closed his eyes. For the first time, I saw a single tear slip down the cheek of the silencer. He whispered, stay. It was a plea. I promised, forever. Epilogue. 6 months later, the conservatory was a riot of color. It didn't look like the gray, rusted skeleton I had walked into on that first day. Now it was a jungle. Orchids draped from the ceiling, in cascades of white and purple. Ferns spilled over the stone pathways in lush green waves. And in the center, the black baccarat roses, the ones that had pricked my finger, were in full, deep red bloom. They were velvet dark, heavy with scent. I stood in the middle of the humid warmth, misting the petals with a spray bottle. The same action I had done in my father's shop a lifetime ago. But it felt different now. Back then, I was misting dead things, trying to trick them into looking alive. Now, I was tending to things that were thriving. I heard the door open behind me, the heavy click of the latch. Strong arms wrapped around my waist. A chin rested on my shoulder. Stefano murmured that I've been in here for hours. His voice rumbled against my back. The guests were arriving. Marco was nervous about the champagne tower. I leaned back into him. He was warm, solid. The scar on his shoulder was a thick ridge under his shirt, a permanent reminder of the day the rain turned red. A reminder of the price of my freedom. I told him to let them wait. I was busy. He chuckled, a sound I heard often now. It was a rich, deep sound that had replaced the silence of the main house. He turned me around. His hand rested on my stomach, which was just starting to show the smallest curve of a bump beneath my dress. He kissed the top of my head and said our son was going to be impatient like his father. I countered that he might be stubborn like his mother. I smiled up at him. He kissed me again, deeper this time, possessive but tender. The kiss of a man who knew exactly what he had and exactly what it cost to keep it. He whispered against my lips, "So, did the flowers survive the beast?" I looked around the garden, at the life that had sprung from the rot, at the man who had built a fortress to protect a flower, and in doing so, had learned how to let the sun in. I said softly that the beast didn't destroy the garden. I placed my hand over his on my stomach. He became the gardener. Stefano smiled, a real smile, one that reached his slate-gray eyes. He said, "Come, let's go home." We walked out of the glass house. Hand in hand, we left the door unlocked behind us.